neighborhood for about 30 years, and I've seen it go through a lot of changes. Some of the changes difficult to deal with, but I found that I can deal with the changes much better if I can understand how the city came to be the way it is, and how the changes that were bigger changes even than the ones I've experienced made this a boomtown over and over again.
It started in old Chinatown. The cable cars made music as they clanged up and down. The flowers there smelled sweet like a garden down the street in San Francisco long ago.
This is considered Fillmore. This is considered the Fillmore area also, because there's only 2 blocks from Fillmore.
It's been called so many different things. I mean, you look on the map, the realtors will call it Hayes Valley. This is not a valley, and it's nowhere near Hayes. You know, it's just not Hayes Valley.
People will call it NOPA.
Most people refer to it as Lower Haight Street, which it also is. We're only a block from Haight.
And it's 2 blocks from the Visadero.
Well, technically, it's Western Addition.
And it sounds like an afterthought when you think about it. Like, it's not really San Francisco, it's an addition. Well, no, it's pretty much, it's the heart of San Francisco.
If you were to take a pin and stick it in the middle of the city and just spin it around, that's exactly where we live.
We're actually this little island in between, which I like, actually. Our identity is not defined, which is fine with me. As soon as you have a name, then you're in trouble. So.
In San Francisco long ago.
Oak Street is a busy residential thoroughfare in San Francisco. It intersects the Wiggle, a major bike route on Scott Street. Tens of thousands of cars and bicycles pass through this high-speed intersection every day. If you were a passerby, you might only notice the hustle and bustle of a fast-paced urban life. But if you slow down, pause, and dwell for a moment at the corner of Oak and Scott, there emerges a different feeling.
I moved in this neighborhood when I was 5 years old.
I'm from the Middle East, from Palestine. I've been working here for 21 years.
I'm the owner of the store here. It's called Jack's Record Cellar. It's been in the spot since 1962, and I've been here since the mid-'80s.
Got this place in '89, right after the earthquake.
Just about 8 years old when we moved over.
I've been teaching martial arts since 1967. I opened the school here in 1979 in this location.
I'm Joel Pomerantz, and I do Think Walks. I lead these walking tours that are based on my research being just an opportunity for me to be curious about my neighborhood. This intersection is a remarkable intersection for San Francisco transportation history, because at Oak and Scott you can see the different, almost geologic layers as the city came through different periods of time. Most of the intersection has Victorians or Edwardians, Queen Anne's, old buildings. But all the buildings on the rest of that block on Scott Street, and most of the buildings for the 3 blocks down Oak Street towards the Panhandle are new buildings compared to the Victorians and the rest of this neighborhood. And this is why. In the 1950s, the plan was to put in this incredibly thick, and I mean that in many ways, network of freeways.
The Central Freeway was going to go all the way to the Golden Gate Bridge.
Oak and Fell were intended to be double-decker freeways, coming all the way through, slicing through this neighborhood, and then going up. They would have knocked all the houses out, yeah. Just as they knocked many of the old Victorians out in the Fillmore district. You know, they bulldozed those as part of urban redevelopment. They put Geary Boulevard running right through it to separate what had been an African-American neighborhood from a Japanese-American neighborhood, which is kind of interesting.
Too many people had houses there they staked into that. And I mean, good old houses. Like our house was built in 1900.
They wanted a quick way through San Francisco without having to be bothered with surface streets and traffic and lights and life and people. There's the freeway revolt that stopped the freeway dead in its tracks.
Once people saw what that was and how it divided the neighborhood and how it changed the feel, we said no more, that was it. So yes, I think everybody feels it was a bad idea.
One of the things that's a remnant of the freeway revolt is the neighborhood organization. The first neighborhood organization in this area, the Haight-Ashbury Neighborhood Council, was created out of the freeway revolt.
I'm glad it did work, because they would have tried to get our house too.
If they didn't have that, then wouldn't be living in this neighborhood. And I think I'm a little thankful for that.
The biggest change at all is the bicycle traffic. Huge, huge, huge change. Because we're right on the wiggle.
The San Francisco Bicycle Coalition reinvigorated its organizing in the 1990s, the early 1990s. And the first thing that we got together to do was pick what project would create a movement for San Francisco bicycling. The project we picked was the Wiggle Project. The Wiggle itself is this zigzag of streets that goes through this neighborhood to avoid the hills. If you want to ride for everyday transportation on your bicycle in San Francisco, you need to know two things in order to make it a pleasurable experience. One is you need to know how to avoid the hills, and the other is you need to know how to avoid the busy, trafficy streets.
Bicycles is something good for this part and for the city, period.
Turns out, avoiding the hills by using the Wiggle through this neighborhood puts you in direct conflict with 5 of the most traffic-filled streets.
I was so mad, I wanted to cuss the funky driver on a funky bus. Let me tell you what happened to me.
This green bike box is the first green bike box in the city, and this was a big experiment, and the experiment started right after the injunction was lifted, the injunction being a 3-year period when the courts said no bicycle infrastructure could be added to San Francisco. The first celebratory act that was accomplished right after the injunction was lifted was to paint this green bike box in this left turn bike lane.
The bike lane there, I really wasn't for it. I understand the plight for the bike coalition, but I don't necessarily agree with the mentality of a lot of bicyclists that don't really pay attention to the road rules, feel that they own the road.
You need a protected bike lane. I mean, it's ridiculous. It's still very dangerous out there for the bikes, especially as quickly as traffic is moving on Oak and Fell streets.
Virtually every day, there's some kind of near miss. There's a lot of pedestrian traffic, and there's a lot of bicycle traffic, and there's a lot of vehicular traffic, and they're all turning, moving, stopping, and going at the same time.
I've seen at least 3 accidents with bicyclists just continuing to make their turn onto Fell Street and a car turning off of Fell and hitting them.
I will say to the Bicycle Coalition of San Francisco, is there any reason that anyone rides without a light at night?
It's as diverse a group riding bicycles in San Francisco as there is doing anything else. If you take a group of people and you put some of them in, put them in cars, some of them are going to be dangerous drivers. And if you put a group of people on bicyclists, some of them are going to be dangerous bicyclists.
I prefer the bicycle than cars, less fume. And the bicycles, most of the bicycles, that's their favorite stop. It was my store. I always carry their favorite beer for them.
So the good news is there's always somebody going by. In terms of public safety, that's probably a good thing. I mean, in terms of watching out or seeing what's going on.
When my oldest son was growing up, I just didn't feel that it was safe with him walking around. There's a lot of nuts out there on the road.
Psychologically, you have people being afraid of each other as the most serious safety issue. And so during the time when there were many different races living together in this neighborhood, there was a much more of a sense by some people of unsafe conditions, even though statistically it was an extremely safe, family-oriented neighborhood.
We've seen a huge change from where everyone used to have bars on their windows.
Yeah.
Where hardly no bars on the window. Crime is low in our area.
Yeah, there was a time, how are you? There was a time when, partially because of the public housing projects, which in the early 80s were still, they were on their last legs. They were really unpleasant housing, and they've since been demolished and replaced with something much nicer. But those years combined, that housing combined with the rise of crack cocaine and drug dealing and the beginning of gangs, made the streets feel at times very uncertain. The other thing that I see, especially on this street now, are all of the .com buses. There's these enormous buses driving up and down the street all the time.
It was such, the crime was high enough that the tour buses wouldn't even stop at Alamo Square to let people out. So when the tour buses started to actually stop and let people go out in the square and take pictures, you knew that things had changed.
There are bad things that do happen in our neighborhood, but luckily our neighbors are always looking out for us, and we're always looking out for them.
It's not always about me. It's about what would be better for this area. That's what makes a neighborhood, really. That people own their homes, they've restored them, they've raised families.
And we sit out on the front steps a lot, which helps to get to know people. Jerry's so outgoing. If someone's unloading from a moving truck, he's right out there saying, you know, hi, welcome to the neighborhood, who are you, where do you live?
I don't think it is I don't think it is a common thing. When I see people outside, they're usually out there smoking a cigarette or going indoors or going outdoors. No one just sits and relaxes on the steps.
Sense of ownership and sense of place, sense of city, all makes this neighborhood what it is. So, yeah, it's really important. Diverse as well.
I have 3 sisters who are from Ethiopia. I have 2 people, a mom and a son, who are from Haiti. I have an Irishman. Since I'm Irish, I have to have at least 1 token Irishman here.
And one of the things we love about the neighborhood is everyone mixes so well. So we know almost all of our neighbors.
We know all our neighborhoods.
Really well.
Except for 2 young guys just moved in.
You know, those that are relatively wealthy, those that are not, those that are renting, but those are versus that are owning. Everyone seems to get along really well.
families with kids. It was kids. It was some, just like you see all the people with little dogs going to that park. That's what it was with kids. Kids. There was nothing but kids in the neighborhood. Everybody had kids.
We spent a lot of time outside.
If you went outside today, you will not see a kid outside playing with anything.
The atmosphere has definitely changed, but the neighborhood was not as nice as it is now. But I think that just because of the way that cultures change and such, I think people just don't feel comfortable with allowing their kids to be outside.
Steamroller, baby.
I'm a singer, period. I sing blues, jazz, rock and roll, gospel.
And I'm gonna roll all over you.
Nightclubs. All over Divisadero. Nightclubs. Nightclubs. 2 blocks down on Haight Street. Nightclubs. A little further down on Fillmore, nightclubs. I got to see John Coltrane. I saw Miles Davis. I've got to see some hella musicians at a young age.
I'm a seething mixer.
The Haight, Lower Haight were a hotbed. Big Brother and the Holding Company's rehearsal hall was 3 blocks away. The Grateful Dead house was at 710 Ashbury. The Jefferson Airplane had a place on Fulton, which is out of this neighborhood. But, the bands were here, they lived here, they played here. You run into them, having a hamburger. So they're just, now good luck finding Journey or Metallica hanging out, you know what I mean?
I'm a napalm bomb, baby. And I am stone guaranteed to blow your mind. Said I'm a napalm bomb. And I am stone guaranteed to blow your mind.
Gradually, it started changing in the 60s as young students really started moving in the area. They were hippies, they were flower children, but they were students, and they were studying, and they was just learning about living and being away from their rich families and stuff.
One of the things that's hard for people to understand who've never lived through a boom is it really changes everything.
My understanding is originally this was a neighborhood that was primarily Jewish.
The Jewish owners of many of these houses in the 1930s sold to the blacks who were here for the shipbuilding boom, and those became the most concentrated neighborhood of black homeowner occupied housing in any neighborhood anywhere in the United States. So this neighborhood had a special personality.
There are less black people here because they can't afford it. And we follow the ship. When this was this righteous seaport, people had more jobs, more money, more things to do, you know. Good hustling. Those houses, the painted ladies that you see lined up in all the San Francisco posters, black people used to live in all them houses, all around that park.
The African Americans that are here tend to be, well, some new people moving in, but largely families that have owned buildings here for many, many, many years.
Now, everything is out of here, it's in the East Bay. People follow that. I think that has a lot to do with it. The economy, you know, you have to follow, the job you have to follow, where it's conducive for your finances to make you have the best place to live. And if it's over there where it's cheaper, then that's where you gotta go.
When we first took over the store in the mid-'80s, you could park anywhere, you would never get a parking ticket. People were living in their cars. This was still a black neighborhood. There's always somebody out sitting on the stoop. It was safe, we never had a problem. If somebody went running by, somebody was probably chasing them. I mean, there was no joggers, there were no strollers. It's a very urban feeling, which I like. I mean, that was fine with me.
Some of us experienced here in this neighborhood in 1996 through 1999, where it was so extreme that every conversation had in it mention of someone being kicked out of their house.
In the late 80s and early 90s, that started to change. As the real estate value started to move up, people either were priced out of their apartments or they sold their property if they owned it. And it became, and then by the time we got to the dot-com boom of 2000, suddenly these properties were being fixed up and painted and were worth gazillions. I mean, it was really astonishing.
For a while, when the internet started and the dot-com came to the San Francisco, I did see a strong business and a strong economy. Then after the meltdown, I did notice things slowed down.
Most recently, that is the dot-com boom in the 1990s and the housing boom right after that, now the new tech boom. Those are the booms that really pushed a new population, younger population into San Francisco.
You get a lot of Google people and Apple people in our neighborhood. I mean, lots of young people.
19-year-olds who had $1 million a year jobs were moving into the neighborhood. They didn't have a lot of world experience and life experience, but they had a fancy sports car.
I'm concerned that it's getting a little upscale and kind of she clothes people are wearing. You know, there's or the dogs they have, or the expensive running shoes they own, or the expensive bicycles they're riding.
It was a radical departure from what the culture had been, dominated by older people. And when you get power and you feel like your power is invincible because you're young, it really changes the atmosphere where you live.
That maybe is the biggest change in the neighborhood, is the economic shift. But there's an ebb and flow. This is the city. It's alive. It changes all the time. It will continue to change. We just lost the produce store at the corner, and I don't think it will come back as a produce store.
The crime came down. Frankly, I think it's because people from other neighborhoods saw the value in its central location. And then young people kind of discovered it.
The neighborhood's improved. There's a lot of good places to eat, and if you said, "Oh, where should I go?" I'd say, "Well, try this and this and this." In the mid '80s, I would have said, "You're out of luck." There's no place to go.
When Lower Haight started, all the businesses started to open up, and the bars, and became a fun place to go for young people in particular. And then Divisadero started to get in restaurants and cafes, and that became a desirable location.
Retail operations in this neighborhood are small independent operations, mom and pop operations. And so the character that this neighborhood shares is something very San Francisco, very individual, very unique in a way, and it all combines to create the flavor of this neighborhood. I miss some of the grittiness that we got when we first lived here. And I think that's probably true of most big cities and gentrification in general. There's this tendency to think that it improves things. The neighborhood looks nicer now. We have more trees. I don't know if it's safer particularly.
It just continued to evolve. Less drug dealing out on the streets, less strong arm robberies and stuff. So it's been a positive change.
I like living in a bohemian neighborhood, but if people are getting hit over the head with bricks, which is something that's happened in the past, and mugged, that's no place to live, or no quality of life.
But I do, honestly, I miss the ethnic mix that this neighborhood had.
Ethnic diversity hasn't changed that much, okay? It's still a multicultural environment, and if you realize that every culture has some great things to offer, that's a positive.
This whole city filters. People can't stand it because they can't find a place to park, leave, if that's the most important thing to them. And this neighborhood has its own filter too. So the people who are here, I'm going to say by and large, are some of the best. My neighbors are wonderful people.
It's a beautiful neighborhood, very active neighborhood. We became families right away.
I lived all over the city. I don't like it nowhere else but here.
I probably spend more time here in the past 30-something years than anywhere else. This is home.
What I would love to see is more diversity, and the only way that could happen is either an earthquake or the end of capitalism. And I don't think the end of capitalism is going to happen as soon as an earthquake, but you never know.
Remember when you took the time? Remember when you told us of the story of the building falling down, 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 down. I could hear the sound. Oh, I thought I was dreaming, but I could hear my mama screaming. Is anybody home? Anybody know? Blame it on your soul, blame it on myself. It's in the city.